Hey everyone, Clio here, and today we're going to be catching up to my progress with series. So this is part of a small series, video series that I'm doing. So I want to be able to give you guys yearly updates on my progress with book series that I'm reading. In order to do that, I need to give you sort of like the bench line. Where are we right now? With right now, I mean at the end of August. So what I read in September isn't counting because otherwise there's a difference between the first video I did in this series and the second one. So if you want to see the book series that I'm currently in the middle of, then I will link my first video in this series that I did. Today we're going to be looking at the series that I'm caught up to. Then we'll be looking at the series that I've concluded, and then finally I'll be talking about the series that I've decided not to continue with. So, for today, all the series that I am currently caught up to, meaning every book that's currently published I have already read, but we are still waiting for a few books to be published within that series. Now, in order not to forget them, I'm going to start with the ones that I don't physically own. First up, a series that a lot of people are waiting for, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire by J.R.R. Martin. So yes, I have read all of the 5 books that are currently out in this series, and like many others, I'm waiting for the 6th one, though in reality I am really not waiting anymore. But I do think that if the 6th one is going to come out, I will probably pick it up and read it. At this point in time, I've lost all interest in this series, but I guess when it'll come out, I will want to see how J.R.R. Martin is continuing with the story. However, maybe I should just wait until he finishes the 7th one, considering the fact that otherwise I will just be in the same boat once again, waiting for I don't know, 8 years or whatever for the next book. So yeah, it is very low on my radar at this point in time, but I wouldn't say that I'm abandoning it because I'm pretty sure that I will want to read the book whenever it comes out. Second book that I don't physically own in this case, because there just aren't any physical copies for it, is King's Dark Tidings series. This is a series by Kel Kate. Kel Kate is now a sort of traditionally published author, and there are some bad voices on the internet that say that because of that she is abandoning that original series that she wrote, and that she isn't really giving any sort of information about whether or not there is going to be a continuation and when we can expect it. So basically I've also been waiting for that one for quite a while. King's Dark Tidings is a series all about Reskin. Reskin is basically the sole student of this sort of academy that has been training him to become a lethal warrior. The one thing that they kind of forgot to include in his training is humanity. So he is a perfect killing machine, and the one thing that he doesn't really know how to deal with is human emotion. At the beginning of the first book, his teachers have this sort of final tests that they set him up for, meaning that he has to kill off all of his teachers except for the sort of masters of this academy. However, something goes wrong because of course these teachers don't just go down without a fight, and the masters end up dying as well, leaving Reskin without a real clue as to what he's supposed to be doing in this world. He does get a sort of final message from the masters, but because they are dying in the process, they kind of give him unclear instructions. In the process, only one teacher remains, and so Reskin sets out into the world to try and find that teacher to complete his assignment of killing off all of his teachers. However, the vague instructions that the teachers have left him mean that he kind of gets entangled in some other stories as well, and the sort of human ineptitude of his interactions with people is the sort of comic relief to this character who, aside from that, is all powerful and can do whatever he sets his mind to. I really love the series. I will say that the final book in the series was kind of my least favorite up until that point, but I did want to see where we were taking this story because I really love the character of Reskin. The character in her new series, which we'll get to later within this video, is pretty similar, but still Reskin still has my heart, so I hope that she does at some point continue this series because I absolutely loved it. Moving on to all the physical series that are lying next to me because they were in a pile, but the pile fell over because it's too big. Let's start off with one closest to me, which is Stormlight Archive. So I will always have like the latest book in the series in my hands, but for a lot of them that is actually the first book in the series, because a lot of these series are basically series that have only just started. But so that is definitely not the case for Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I think the first book came out over 10 years ago. He is publishing them sort of like every 3 years or so. So when this series, which is going to be a 10-part series, is finished, I will be God knows how old already, but Stormlight Archive is an epic fantasy series that follows a lot of POVs. There's a lot of war involved. It's a war between like two different species, and there's a lot of nuance and complexity to that whole backstory to that war. There is a magic system, but it's kind of gone lost, and we'll be trying to reclaim the magic system throughout this series. Now, this very much is a huge series. It's going to be a 10-part series. Every book is over 1,000 pages, but it will be 2 sequences of 5 books. So in case you need to catch up to Stormlight Archive, do know that when the 5th book is coming out, those 5 books will all together form a cohesive whole and should mean that we are left off on a sort of like natural pause, and that it's okay to, you know, take a breather at that point in time. So that's a little bit less daunting, I guess, than knowing that we're starting a 10-part series that isn't even halfway through its length. Next up, I am caught up to Saga. So this is a graphic novel series that is written by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. It currently has 9 volumes out, and I think that they are working on the rest now. They took like a 1-year hiatus, but it has been more than a year since they published this one. I think it's been like 2 years, maybe even more already, but I think I saw that they are continuing on with the series at this point in time, so we can hopefully expect a new volume within this series soon. So this is a sci-fi graphic novel series in which it's basically sort of like Romeo and Juliet story. So we have these 2 protagonists from 2 different races who fall in love with one another, but you know, the universe is out to get them basically, because the people in control, they don't want these sort of matches between races. They don't want these races to cross the divide, to overcome their differences. I very much love this graphic novel series. I think it tackles some very interesting topics, some very important topics. It also has quite some LGBTQIA+ representation. There is a gay couple within this one. There is also a trans person within this series. Do know that it has some very graphic depictions, so it's not like suitable for every single age, for example. But yeah, absolutely love this one. I'm really looking forward to its continuation, because this one ends on a note that you're like, no, I want the next one. Next up, a quite recent one for me, and that is the Silent Gods series. So this is book number 2, Master Artificer by Justin Call. This book came out in 2021, in May I think, and so I've already completed it at this point, so I'm caught up to this. This is supposed to be eventually a 12-part series in which we follow our protagonist, Anef, as he goes from sort of like cinnamon roll character to villain. Now, this one has great disability representation, especially the first book. The second one doesn't dive into it as much as the first one did. But so in this world, disability is very much a sign of evil, and Anef, our protagonist, is born with just one hand. For that reason, they try to kill him at birth, but he is saved by the local priest and he's raised by him. And he's given at that point a magical artifact that will help him hide his disability. And so in the first one especially, we dive very much into the sort of like ableism that is inherent in this society. Very much love this series, and hopefully we'll be able to like keep up with them as they are being published, so that I don't run behind at any point. Next up, we have one that I guess at this exact point in time I might not be caught up to anymore, and that is Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. So a few days ago, a novella within this series was published, so I guess at this point in time I'm not caught up, but at the beginning of September I was. So Starsight is the second book in the Skyward series, which is a YA sci-fi series in which we are following Spencer, who is sort of like unlikable narrator in the beginning, let me tell you, but she does definitely grow on you throughout that first book. And her fighter is kind of a discredited fighter pilot because he abandoned the mission and he abandoned his crew. And so in this society, basically cowardice is like the worst possible thing, you know. People are very much focusing on the importance of bravery, and so as a result Spencer is very much a persona non grata within this society. However, her big life goal is to become a fighter pilot like her father, and she just might have been given a second chance. I very much loved Skyward. As I said, I originally really hated that character, but there was so much character growth within that first book, and there's also sort of like found family trope within that first one, and you have wonderful characters such as Mbot and Doomslog, and so yeah, I absolutely love that first one. Second one was a little bit less. I felt like it was a little bit too much of a rehash of the first one, and we abandoned part of the cast that we originally had in the first book, and I missed those characters a lot, so I hope that in the third one we will get to see most of those characters back again, and so the story might just like kick it up a notch again. Next up, another jolly one, another one that a whole lot of people are waiting for, and that would be the Kingkiller Chronicles. So The Name of the Wind and second book, The Wise Man's Fear. So I read The Name of the Wind when The Wise Man's Fear was like close to publication, so quite a long time ago, and I really absolutely loved The Name of the Wind. It was such a whirlwind of a story. I really loved every aspect to it. And then the second one, like it was the case for a lot of people who read it, was a big disappointment. So I've been waiting forever for this third book to see whether things pick up again. Also in terms of its chronology, it seems super weird that we are going to be able to fulfill everything that is mentioned at the back of the first book before the end of the third book, because basically in the story you're following Kvothe. Kvothe is a sort of like legendary figure, and we have this sort of chronicler who has tracked him down because he has disappeared from the radar for a long time. So he finds Kvothe, and Kvothe will tell his life story to him in the course of 3 nights. And so the first book is very much that first night, and so in that first night he goes over his sort of like youth and the way in which he got into university and sort of the start of his university career. I very much love this story, love the way in which it was told, love the writing style. It's a little bit more sort of like lyrical, a little bit more emphasis on the quality of the writing than some other fantasy might necessarily do. And you know, I loved it. I loved every aspect of it. I often reread a certain scene within this book that I absolutely adored, but the second one I would absolutely need to reread because I barely remember anything about it except for not really liking it. So, but I'm definitely not going to be rereading it until I have news on when the third one is finally going to come. We are waiting for this one as long, I think, as we have been waiting for the final Game of Thrones. In both cases I didn't read the final book immediately when it came out, so I haven't been waiting as long as some people, luckily, but still, it's been a while. So next up is one that I've only recently read and only recently started, and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. Look at that cover, it is just gorgeous, glorious, love it. So this is basically marketed as Mulan meets Song for Achilles. I've heard a lot of people complain about that marketing line, but you know, I think marketing lines always need to be taken in their bare essence. So basically Mulan refers to the fact that we have a Chinese setting and a character who is born female and dresses as a man. And the Song for Achilles vibes, I guess, just refer to the existence of a queer relationship and to some sort of a tragedy to that queer relationship. So if you take it at that essence, that is what this story is, but this story is so much more. So basically this is a retelling of the origin of the Ming Dynasty, which is basically one of sort of like the glorious dynasty within Chinese history. We are following the originator of this dynasty, Zhu Chongpa, but Zhu Chongpa is actually the brother to our protagonist. However, he is destined for greatness, the fates have decided so, but he dies at an early age. His sister, who we only know by her family name Zhu, takes over his identity and manages to get a position within a monastery. And so the story is all about her journey throughout this book, her journey to greatness, which is her biggest goal. However, a lot of the story is also about her struggles with gender. So Zhu is born a girl, however, the majority of her life she spends as a boy. And the story very much looks at how she is neither. She isn't really fully a girl, she isn't fully a boy, she doesn't identify fully as either one of these. A lot of the conflict within this book centers around the conflict with the Mongolians. So the Mongolians at this point in time have taken control over at least a very big portion of Chinese territory. There is resistance against their control of the territory, and so Zhu will be part of the resistance basically, but we are also following a character that is part of the Mongolian army. And aside from that, I really just loved how ingrained this was into Chinese cultures, how much Chinese cultural aspects are in there, and how many of those aspects aren't even really explained to the general public, so are really just a sort of like enrichments for people who are more acquainted with Chinese culture deeper than, you know, your standard Western reader might be. But so absolutely love this one. This is going to be part of a duology, so next year I'm hoping we will get the sequel to this one and this one will be completed. Is The Burning Kingdom by Tasha Suri. So the first one, The Jasmine Throne, has come out in June, I think. I have read it. I will say that I wasn't fully sold on this one. It didn't fully capture my attention. It was a little bit of a struggle to get through from time to time. So this is more sort of like Indian-inspired fantasy. I think the specific culture that it's inspired by is called Desi. And this one is all about this princess in captivity, basically. This princess who hasn't really fulfilled the role that her sort of like overpowering brother wanted her to fulfill. He wanted her to basically commit suicide in order to save her people, basically be sort of like spiritual sacrifice for her people, and she did not want to comply with that particular role. So he cast her off into a part of the empire that's basically kind of rebellious, or that has had a rebellious past, and within that kingdom lives our second protagonist, who is basically a child of power, who saw basically all of her fellow magicians, let's call them like that, burned alive at some point in her childhood. These two characters will form an attraction to one another and a romance will ensue, and aside from that, it's very much about the political plays between the different factions in that rebellious part of the world. I like the political aspect of it, but I feel like there wasn't enough action in this book, and with that I don't necessarily mean that I needed more action sequences or anything like that, but I felt like our protagonists were a little bit too passive, a little bit too reactive for a big part of this plot, and I think that that is the cause for me struggling with this one a little bit more. So hopefully, since we've resolved the situations, the circumstances of this first book, the second one will pick up a lot more for me, because I am very much intrigued about this world and the folklore and the traditions within it, but we didn't get to explore it all that much within the first one because of certain restrictions that were in the circumstances of our characters. So hopefully onwards to better with the sequel. Next up we have The Shroud of Prophecy by Cal Kate. So this is the first book, the only published book so far, Fate of the Fallen. I think the second one in this series is going to come out in early 2022, so I'll have a book to continue with at that point in time. So Cal Kate is the author of King's Dark Tidings, which I referred to earlier. So Fate of the Fallen is her first traditionally published work, and in this one we are following basically sort of like the best friend of the Chosen One, and early on within the storyline the Chosen One is sent out on a quest to save humanity basically, but so like 5 miles into his journey he is killed. And so basically people are saying like, that's it, you know, humanity is screwed, you know, there's nothing we can do. But his best friend feels like he has a responsibility to pick up where his friend left off and to at least inform people of the demise of his best friend. And the adventures ensues from there. Cal Kate's fantasy is kind of hit and miss with a lot of people. I find it a little bit more like humoristic fantasy. It has a lot of sort of like twists and turns, and so there are many conveniences to these stories, but I always just really love the sort of like character dynamics and the sort of humor that is put into these books, and to the adventure aspect to it. I think that they're always like a really fun ride. So they're not like my favorite fantasies in the sense that they won't be the most well thought out books. They aren't the books that, you know, tackle the big issues or anything like that, but they're just a really fun ride, and I love the characters that are put into them. But I will say that a lot of the characters feel very similar to the characters of our original series, King's Dark Tidings, and in that sense I would have kind of just wanted them to pick up King's Dark Tidings and publish that traditionally instead of having this new series, because I originally fell in love with those type of characters in her original series, and so these characters mainly just remind me of her original characters, which is not to say that this is a copy from her original series. I just love the original series a little bit more. But yeah, I absolutely love this one, and even though you abandon our sort of like Chosen One early on, he does still play a role in the form of a talking decapitated head, so what's not to love? Next up we have a series that will be concluding next year, and that is A Chorus of Dragons, wow, I had to think there. A Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons. The most recent book in this series is The House of Always, which came out May 2021. I started the series in 2021, caught up to the series in 2021. I'm very happy for having done so. It was kind of spur of the moment. I had been intrigued about starting this series. First book is called The Rune of Kings, but I kind of, didn't want to prioritize it because I was prioritizing books that I had on my shelves. But, Sarah from Voyage to Word asked if we would body read this series or if anybody wanted to body read this series. And I was like, this is my chance to get around to this series, to not have it wait around forever. I'm so happy that I did so. So this is a series, basically, it's very difficult to describe this series, I think. But the way in which it's kind of branded or marketed is that we have our protagonist called, Jesus, how long ago did I read this? Kieran, of course. And Kieran is basically the sort of thief who is in the wrong place at the wrong time. He basically stumbles upon a crime scene at the beginning of this story, and through his involvement in that scene, or through his presence there, it is discovered that he is actually the lost heir to a specific royal house within this kingdom. Now you would think, perfect, he's reclaimed to his family, he lives the life he's always wanted to lead, but it turns out that being reclaimed by this family isn't all things sugar and spice and everything nice. It turns out that, he is reclaimed by a family with a very abusive father, for example. And it also turns out that he has a role to play in a certain prophecy, a prophecy that doesn't necessarily have good things in store for him. So this one is a ride, I will say. It is very confusing. The story starts off with two timelines. So basically we have Kieran in prison, and he will be entering in dialogue with the person who is keeping him there, and they will be telling his story, but they're starting from different points within his past. And so we will be alternating between two timelines when it comes to this story. But so aside from the confusion of starting with two different timelines, there's also quite some confusion when it comes to the lineage to these characters, and that confusion kind of grows throughout the book, and I will admit throughout the series. I'm very much eager to reread the series before the final book is completed, and hopefully upon reread I will be able to understand the lineage, the family dynamics better, because I will know all of these characters a lot better. But I will say, regardless of that, even if you're confused, just go along with it. It is a fun ride regardless. Basically just roll along with it. It is a fun ride regardless, and it is queer as fuck. There are so many queer characters. The further you get into the series, the more queer characters pop up, to the point that you're like, who is actually still straight within this world? Alright, and then I just have two more to show. Basically these are standalones at this point in time, but we already know that they're gonna be part of a series, so for that reason I'm mentioning them here in the caught up section. So that will be Elantris by Brandon Sanderson and Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So these two books are currently standalones within his Cosmere universe, but we know that he will continue on to write more books within these series. I'm not entirely sure when he's getting around to them. I think he mentioned it in his State of the Sanderson, basically his yearly update when it comes to his works. But, they're coming, but I don't think it's anytime soon. Especially, at the very least, Stormlight Archive, the first 5 books need to be completed, but I think he probably also wants to continue with Mistborn before he dives into these ones, but I could be wrong about that. So, Elantris is his first published work. In it, basically, we're looking at this sort of like fallen society. Elantris used to be this mighty kingdom, and its inhabitants were revered as gods because of their magical powers. One day there was a huge rift in the country, and all Elantrians found out that their magical powers had gone to waste, and they themselves were also slowly going to waste. They started not healing anymore, so whenever they would have a cut or a bruise, the pain of that would stay with them forever. Now, as a result, Elantris became this fallen kingdom. The city is in quarantine, and the power has shifted to a new capital called Kai. Now the story kicks off when the crown prince of this kingdom wakes up one morning, finds out that he is turned into an Elantrian, and is sent off into the city of Elantris to basically disappear over there. There are multiple characters that we follow within the series, including his fiancée who was on his way to marry him and who doesn't know that he is actually still alive. as well as a priest who is looking to take advantage of the fear and misunderstanding about Elantris in order to spark hatred and in order to convert people to his religion. Warbreaker, on the other hand, is a story in which we're following these two sisters, two princesses, who are very different from one another. One of them is very much a rule follower. She is the eldest daughter. She has been groomed all of her life to go off to the enemy kingdom basically and marry the sort of like god king that they have over there. The other is basically a rule breaker. She is the youngest daughter. She doesn't really have a purpose that she is assigned to, and so she has been left to roam freely. However, when the time comes for their father to send his daughter off to the God King, he last minute decides to send his youngest daughter instead of his oldest daughter. A very fun read that offers you some twists and turns that you might not see coming, and I really love the sort of like aspect of the living god. So in this world there are people who have been reincarnated, and so they are revered as living gods and live in this opulent palace, and there's a whole lot of politics going on between the gods as they're trying to push for certain actions within the world. And you know, I really love this, and it has a great character called Lightbringer, another great character called Nightblood. So greatness to Warbreaker. Absolutely love this one. Would also be a great way to start with Brandon Sanderson. I think for me personally, Warbreaker or The Final Empire are the books that I would push for you to start with. And that's it. Those are all of the book series that I'm currently caught up to. I don't think it is a huge list, but considering the fact that I'm also still making my way through some series that are already finished in terms of publication, I do still have quite a bit of series that I'm in the middle of. But at least for these ones, it isn't my fault. I'm caught up. I'm just waiting for more books to be published. But so if you've made it this far, congratulations. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of these are on your radar. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you guys for a future one. Bye!